All right, so we're going to look at impact. So once we kind of officially declare war, once we send troops into Vietnam, what is that going to look like? Okay, so we're going to look at two different kind of types of war. So first, we're going to look at ground war. So soldiers on the ground, what does that look like in Vietnam? So when we go into Vietnam, our policy specifically in Vietnam is going to be containment. We don't have any territorial goals. We just have the idea. We want to stop the spread of communism. We're not looking to gain any land for the United States. We're trying to just stop the spread of communism. Okay? Vietnam War also gets nicknamed the Living Room War. Okay? So remember, we talked about the technology of the 1950s. The average middle class family is going to have at least one television in their household. Okay? This is going to be the first time that reporters are going to be directly in Vietnam reporting right along with the soldiers daily. Okay, so they're getting news report. They're seeing these soldiers fight. They're seeing kind of the death and devastation as we go on. Okay, so especially as the war wears on longer and longer, keep in mind when we talk about the Living Room War, this is going to actually influence how the United States sees the Vietnam War. Okay, so on the ground war, one thing that we had to deal with greatly is going to be this idea of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Ran all the way through Vietnam, okay? When we talk about Vietnam, very kind of tropical location, very thick and dense jungle. And this is going to run right through there, and this is going to be used to attack in South Vietnam. Okay? We talked about the Viet Minh, who were supporters of the North Vietnamese, and then we have Viet Cong. Okay, these are more kind of like traitors and spies. These are going to be people within South Vietnam who was supposed to be democratic, but who maybe secretly supported Ho Chi Minh. So it was very hard, again, as we move through this war, okay, when we kind of draw this border at the 17th parallel, but we don't know who is communist, who is democratic, who's part of the Viet Cong. So it's very hard to clearly know who our enemy is. Okay, we also fight in the air. Okay, so we've seen throughout World War One, World War Two, our Air Force has developed greatly, and we are going to use that to fight in Vietnam. Okay, we're constantly bombing North Vietnam under Operation Rolling Thunder. So we're going to bomb the North Vietnam capital and North Vietnam in general pretty much nonstop. It's kind of consistent bombing for 3 years. We're also going to target along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Okay, the clearer we can kind of clear out the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the better we're going to be. Okay, now if a pilot was shot down, they became prisoners of war, which we're going to see kind of a big impact again in how we see the Vietnam War as far as the public and the amount of prisoners of war that there were. Okay, two other things that we used to help clear out the jungle was going to be Agent Orange, which is kind of like a chemical herbicide that would basically destroy the jungle. We would also use napalm. Napalm is a highly flammable, sticky jelly. Kind of think about like a flamethrower, and we use that to literally burn down the jungle. The problem with both of these are kind of the impacts that we see on everyday people that were living within Vietnam. Okay, this destroyed kind of people's way of life. Again, the chemicals were very harmful to the people, and the napalm literally attacked people living within villages. Okay, so again, you can kind of see the napalm attack and affect people. Literally, everyday people are being affected by this. Okay, so this we kind of talked about. When we talk about the Viet Cong, again, they were not clearly labeled as traitors or the enemy. Most of them were regular villagers within South Vietnam, and they would do their regular work during the day and then become guerrillas at night. Now, again, when we talk about guerrilla, think about guerrilla warfare with the surprise attack. And a lot of them would help these U.S. troops, befriend them, and then eventually lead them into ambushes. Okay, this group of people was very resourceful, but it also ruined the relationship between the Vietnamese and the U.S. soldiers. The U.S. soldiers didn't know who they could trust. Sometimes Viet Cong would use children to lead these sabotages. They would use gift and teddy bears that would be explosive, very confusing and misleading to the soldiers. Okay, so again, when we talk about guerrilla warfare, the Viet Cong are using tunnels to kind of hide the jungle. They had a huge advantage when we talk about these tunnels and overall knowing the location that they're fighting in. Okay, the US, we're not used to fighting in this terrain and we're not used to fighting this guerrilla warfare style, so we're at a huge disadvantage when we fight in Vietnam. Now, as we progress again, American citizens kind of get more and more antsy as we fight in this ground war. Okay, General Westmoreland, he was the main U.S. general at the time fighting in Vietnam, and again, he wants to get the public behind us, and he said we are winning the war. Okay, that is not truthful, and we also had no way to measure the war. Okay, how could we even determine if we were winning? Who was killed more? Because we had no goals of gaining land. Okay, what's really going to be kind of the turning point when we look at kind of public attitude towards the Vietnam War is going to be what's known as the Tet Offensive. Okay, when we talk about the Tet, this is going to be like a national holiday, sort of like what we would talk about like a New Year's celebration. Now, typically when we have these types of holidays, we saw when we talked about other wars, we would literally pause the war. Okay, so there's an agreement between the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese that they were going to kind of pause the war to celebrate the Tet holiday. Okay, well, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong used this kind of pause to attack over 100 cities and the embassy. Okay, so kind of the hub for U.S. support in Saigon. Okay, now again, think about the living room war. We're seeing this all very, very publicly, and this is going to be a huge defeat. Okay, the American public kind of sees we're not really winning the war. We don't really see any active progress, so why are we still participating in Vietnam? Okay, so when we see the impact, everybody feels a little bit kind of lied to by the government. They feel a little bit disillusioned. They're very angry. And again, we're sending all of these soldiers consistently. We're increasing participation in Vietnam, and we're not really sure for what anymore. So we feel a little bit disillusioned by the government and a little bit angry towards the U.S. government. Okay, so you see a lot of anti-Vietnam War propaganda during this time period. Okay, so because of this, okay, and we'll talk about Great Society when we talk about LBJ's domestic policy, but we see this when kind of people realize what's really going in Vietnam. We're going to see popularity drop dramatically. Because of this, LBJ announces that he would not run for a second term. He realized kind of with his popularity dropping as sharply as it would, he would most likely not be elected for president.